Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, folks. It's Joe here. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm just going to give a few minutes for folks to join in. I see about a dozen in right now. I think we have another dozen or so. So we'll just give them a few minutes and then we'll get going. For those people just joining, I'm just giving a few minutes for folks to get in the room here. Just looking for a couple more people from the registration. And then we'll get going on our crash course to race prep, whenever those may be. If anyone has questions throughout, feel free to throw them in the chat or the questions box. I'll be happy to answer those. I'm going to try to click through those periodically throughout the broadcast, but if nothing else, I will make sure to check them at the end. So if you do have those questions or comments, feel free to fire away. We're just going to give them another minute or two here. Okay, I'm going to get started. I know there's a couple more people who are registered, but they'll most likely come in a couple minutes. For those who don't know me, my name is Joe Rich. I am a USA Triathlon Level 1 coach for Outravel Racing, the Run Formula, and the Cycling Formula. I also manage Cycle Life Studio, the QT2 Systems, a local indoor training facility in Whitman, Massachusetts. So for the local folks have been there and trained, if you haven't and you're ever in the area, please stop in and come visit. There's just a couple things about myself here. If I can get to the next screen. Um, I've been in triathlon for 12 years, and 6 years coaching, 4 years with QT2 Systems. I've been coaching endurance sport, and specifically high school and collegiate track and field and cross country for the last 9 years. I've been the head coach of Braintree High School in Massachusetts for the last 5 years. Um, I also coached collegiately at Curry College in Milton, Mass for 2 years, their cross country team. I was a high school varsity runner, collegiate cyclist while I was getting into triathlon. I've been a 70.3 Worlds qualifier, USA Triathlon All American, Ironman All World Athlete Gold. And the reason that I want to share some of those things with you isn't to tell you how awesome I am, which obviously I am, but I think in this current time where we've been, quarantined, not racing, and while we all kind of think about preparing to race again, come, if it's this fall, if it's next year, whenever racing may be. I have a lot of experience getting athletes back to racing. I have a lot of experience coming back to racing myself. And I think it's important that we all explore what that's going to look like, things that you should be doing now, and things that we want to be doing uh, once we know that racing is definitely going to happen. Um, some of these things might sound pessimistic. I think we all want to be optimistic, but we also want to be realists about what our experience is going to be going forward, um, for multi-sport, for single sport, whatever you are racing in. So we just want to give you some insight, some tips to get moving forward, and things like that. So when are we going to race? Well, we don't really know. Obviously, most race organizations want safety, or safety is their priority, and they want safety ensured for all athletes in order to host a race, um, even if it's at a smaller scale. It also is going to depend on your own comfort level. Obviously, when racing happens, you don't have to race yourself. So just you want to be comfortable racing yourself before you actually sign up for a race, and then just for the opportunity to lend itself to being beneficial for everybody. Will the race organization be profitable for it? Will athletes have an enjoyable experience? Things like that. What it might look like. I wrote a blog post about this for the company about a month ago, when we thought that the race in Lubbock, Texas was going to happen, which it did not. But still, we have a good sense of some of the things that might happen based on the return to sport policies that USA Triathlon and Ironman produced about a month ago. So I wrote a blog about it. If you want to check that out, I'll talk a little bit about some of the policies and things going forward that we might see on the local, national, and world level. So, how do we prepare to move forward here in this sport? I'm going to break it down into two parts. Okay. So, there's things that we should be doing right now, and then ways to get race ready. So, the things that we should be doing right now, hopefully, you might have done some of these things today. So, we're maintaining our base fitness, we're focusing on any limiters or things that are weak in our endurance sports training or racing. We're keeping self-care a priority, your daily nutrition and training nutrition, your restoration, recovery, sleep, and your training for both mental and physical health. We're monitoring the race calendar if we've signed up for races or we want to race this fall. We're keeping an eye on what race organizations are doing. And right now, based on cancellations, we're probably dialing back training a little bit. And we'll get to all these things in further slides. So those are some of the things that we'll be doing now that we'll talk about. Things to do to get race ready. We want to not only, so right now we're dialing back our training a little. We probably want to dial back our expectations a little. For some of us, it might be close to, if we're not racing this year, it might be 2 years between races. That race mentality, that race readiness is a hard thing to bring back. Um, Some people are better at it than others, but just dialing back the expectations to start is probably a good thing. We'll talk about that more. Monitoring race protocols, making sure that you know what to do for packet pickup or bib pickup, transition area for multi-sport athletes, the field limit or the event size, if you're making sure you're registering in time, the award ceremony, if they're requiring masks, we'll talk about all those things. When races do happen, the appropriate way to increase volume intensity, which will vary based on when the race may be, your strengths and weaknesses, which we'll talk about, and keeping your equipment ready. That is something that you should be doing now and prior to your race day. Okay. So we'll start with the things to do now. Again, for folks who I see just are joining in here, if you do have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat as we get going here. Okay, so things to do right now. First thing, maintaining the base fitness. That's simple. Multi-sport athletes, your swim, bike, run, and strength work, you just keep doing it. Single sport, same thing. If you're a cyclist, you're just riding and doing strength work. Runners, running and strength work. Swimmers, swimming and strength work. The thing that hasn't changed here is that we still want to be fit, right? We're type A personalities. We've joined the multi-sport community or the endurance sport community to be fit, to have an active and healthy lifestyle. So maintaining that base fitness is a good idea. We want to keep the training volume, with that said, at a reasonable level. If you are now working from home or maybe you were laid off for a period of time, we want to make sure the added volume is a reasonable volume for when your life is then back to normal, right? We don't want to have this expectation after you've added, say, over 50% to your training week to then be the same fitness level once race season happens and you're back to work or you're back to your normal schedule. All right, so that's something we want to keep an eye on. We also want to avoid overtraining to stay injury free. I think a lot of folks, their instinct is now that they have this free time, it's a good time to fill in more training, harder efforts. We can do that if it's helpful for your mental health, especially in the pandemic. It's okay to add some volume or some intensity, but we want to avoid overdoing it so that we can be injury free. And so that when we do want to turn it back on our training for race season, we're not burnt out from all the extra training that we might have done during this period of time. So avoiding overtraining is critical right now. This will all allow for an easier crash course, right? The crash course to race prep is obviously a lot to do with how well your fitness is maintained right now, because that strong foundation will lead to an easier increase in your training load for volume and intensity once your race appears to be within 4 to 6 weeks. And as a bonus, the routine should help your mental strength, as I kind of touched on before. Right now, when there's no races on the horizon, it can be tough to motivate yourself to get out the door for that ride or for that long run. And it's good to do right now, especially in some of the hot summer months, to kind of execute these efforts, knowing that it's going to pay off in the long run. Okay, so maintaining base fitness, part one of the 2 parts of this broadcast. I'm also going to say too, I just want to touch on this before my new puppy goes a little too insane. If you hear a bark in the background, my dog is quite excited right now that I am talking to a computer. So bear with me if you hear that. So focusing on limiters, it's a great opportunity right now, like you would in the off season, which we are kind of in right now, to focus on things that you might not be as strong in. So if you're weak in multi-sport aspect, if you're weak in any of the 3 disciplines, it's a great opportunity, especially now that it's warm and we can be outside, to add a little extra volume to that and maybe take away some volume from the other 2 disciplines. Also a good opportunity for those folks who may have skipped out on some strength work this past winter, it's a great time to make those strength workouts green in your Training Peaks account, right? Make sure you're doing the strength work. That will greatly improve how your body adapts to the base training and the future builds and overloads. That muscle really does help your endurance, and it'll help keep you injury free, which is all part of the base phase. We want to make sure we're working on those injury preventive muscles so that when we get to those harder intensities, we are able to adapt a little bit better and not be injured when we add them. For those folks who missed the water for a little bit, I know up in the Northeast, we certainly missed a few months of swimming because the pools were closed. So take your time getting back into the water if you have not gotten back into the water yet. I think a lot of people have, especially with some pools open, with lake and ocean swimming possible with some warmer temperatures, but just bringing it back at a reasonable volume and intensity. And then we also, it's never a bad idea to focus on increasing our aerobic capacity and endurance, which I think most people can improve upon, even if you're very aerobic or do very well with your endurance. It's a good idea to make sure we're focusing a lot on those endurance type efforts and working on the difference between recovery and aerobic pace, as well as heart rate. So focusing on limiters. Self-care, a priority. Beyond training, we want to have you focus on you. These three things we touched on the earlier slide. Nutrition, a big thing right now, obviously with restaurants starting to reopen, you've probably had to cook a lot. So being able to expand your repertoire. It's never a bad idea to add extra plants or veggies to your diet, different recipes to help keep your nutrition healthy. Also, beyond the daily nutrition, we want to focus on your training and race fueling. So dialing in the fueling that works for your particular gut, as well as for the folks who like to use on-course nutrition, which we'll get to a little bit later. Maybe you're practicing what the race organizations use for nutrition. So for triathletes, for example, Ironman uses Gatorade Endurance. We often recommend Gatorade Endurance for most athletes. So it's a good idea to practice it. A lot of people do complain that maybe the sugar or the saltiness of it is a little bit high, doesn't sit with their gut well. Often, if you practice with it, you'll end up doing pretty good with the Gatorade Endurance. So it's something good that's good to practice. And then hot days, keeping up the hydration. This goes for both right now during this kind of return to sport phase and race season, obviously with more humidity, more heat. We want to have an extra focus on hydration before, during, and after your workouts. So something to keep in mind. Restoration and recovery, keeping yourself on an honest sleep schedule. Maybe focusing on not binge watching your favorite show until 2 a.m. Not all the time anyway. Keep recovering. Do your easy rides and runs. Your foam rolling, daily stretching, activation routines. It's really important to continue their recovery work so that if you want to do some harder days or some KOM searching on Strava or Everesting type efforts, you're able to both do those hard efforts and then recover well. So on a sleep schedule, incorporating the recovery work, and then that self-massage, foam roller, etc. Still very important. Training-wise, obviously training is important for endurance athletes, but it's a priority not only physically but mentally for us too. So I think a lot of people struggle with the dedication portion at this point because it's hard to justify why am I training. Find reasons to train. Go explore. If it's a monthly challenge, so I know that there's a local race organization in Massachusetts it's doing a monthly mileage challenge, hop into that. Search for Strava KOMs if that's something that you're interested in. A lot of you see a lot of professional athletes who went for those FKT, the fastest known times for certain segments. Um, those these types of challenges will help keep your drive. Um, it'll keep that competitiveness in your mind, which will pay off when racing resumes. And obviously, all of this is in moderation, which we'll discuss a little bit later in the presentation. But um, we don't want to overdo any of these extra efforts so that when racing returns, we're burnt out from those hard efforts, or we're burnt out from the mental fatigue of trying our hardest for all of these. So all in moderation, but be okay being a little bit less disciplined while still maintaining a routine of training. Monitoring the race calendar. Multisport, we're kind of in this limbo mode where I think many folks thought that we might see a race this month in August, um, or a race in September. I know some folks thought that Lubbock might happen at the end of June. Obviously, a lot of these things have been canceled or are not going to happen. So it's all up in the air. And I think it's going to be up in the air based on location, the size of the race, and the time of year going forward. Um, I think for most people, your A race is probably out for 2020. Not to be a pessimist again, but it might be more advantageous to start looking toward 2021, or before that, start looking towards single sport. So if you're a single sport athlete, like a runner or just a cyclist, you might have a race or two if it's on the smaller scale come this fall. Or if you're interested in doing so, it's a great skill to learn to mountain bike or gravel ride for a triathlete, good bike handling skills, cross country running, or just any kind of standalone run races. If they're happening safely and if you're comfortable in participating in them, give them a try. And then make sure that you set any kind of target races or any kind of I want a PR at this particular race. Make sure you set those up far in advance to give you enough prep time, which we'll talk about in the second part of this presentation. And then, like I said, look toward 2021, whether that be the same race if you deferred your entry to 2021 from 2020. That would be a good goal to have. If you're looking toward maybe you need some time off at some point in the sport and you think that maybe next fall is better, or you're going to take time off now and maybe next spring if we're back to normal racing or back to racing in general. Look toward that calendar, try to figure out what works best for you, both timing wise on the race calendar and personally if you feel comfortable racing. Okay. Then the last part of what we should be doing now, dial back training a little and train less. What? How dare you? Well, again, I know a lot of people think that, well, we have time right now. And maybe you folks don't think that, and that's a great thing. But the main reason is that we want to make sure in periodization, if your long race is months away or potentially a year away, you want to save those super long weeks, those 20, 30-hour weeks potentially for some folks, for those consecutive weeks, I should say, for that period of time. We want to be able to recover. We want to be able to enjoy the sport and continue participating in the sport without overdoing it and then potentially risking injury or burnout or just not wanting to partake anymore. So, remember to recover, because in that periodization, we normally do get the opportunity to recover after racing. So if you go for a hard effort, or if you go for a fast century or a fast 5K, remember to take a couple of days to recover, active recovery, or just taking a few days off. And then be flexible. If you have a friend who invites you to a group ride and you feel comfortable going and it's not in your schedule, but you want to do it anyway, talk with your coach. I'm sure that's perfectly fine. If you'd prefer to do a long hike instead of a long run on a certain weekend, go for it. use this time to enjoy the sport again. I think sometimes we often get too disciplined into making sure that every single workout is executed perfectly. And I think in this period of time, we can kind of treat it like maybe our November, December timeframe, where we are a little bit less hyper focused on specific sessions and more focused on consistency and building back up. So I think that's an important thing to try to do right now. And it's a good chance to focus a little bit less on those colors, like we talked about, the reds, yellows, and greens, and move things around as needed. So be flexible, recover, and just don't overdo it. Keep training, and add some long days if you want. Take some time off if you need to, but just keep that consistency and don't overdo it. Okay, so now we're going to get into part 2. I'm just going to click through here, see if we have any questions. Okay, not yet. Good. Okay, so now your race is coming. Let's get ready. But let's dial back the expectations a little. The big thing for me that I think a lot of us would forget is that the fatigue, mentally, physically, emotionally, from any type of situation such as the one we're in, like a pandemic, um, is a can be a very big stressor. And anytime we have big life stressors, say a move, a graduation from a degree of college, postdoctorate, um, any type of situation like that, it's an added stressor that often you forget is really a training stressor too. You think about, let's take moving for example. You're spending time, maybe X amount of days, lifting boxes, unpacking, packing, and it's tough to get the point being that's a smaller situation, but in a big stressor like this, it's tough to get race ready in such a short time. So if we know, for example, let's use November 1st as a race date that we think a race might happen. We don't know until September 15th that it's going to happen. So we're not really training as if we're doing our zone 2 sessions tempo. We're not getting our speed work in. So when we find out that it's going to happen on September 15th, that's great, but we're going to be cautious about increasing the intensity and volume as needed in order to make sure you get to the race safely without injury, and you have a decent race, but it might not be your A race. So just dial back the expectations a little bit. Like it says in the second point there, it's probably a good idea for you to be your B race. You think about the first race of your in the spring, right? It often isn't your best effort for most people. Some people are a little different. So you don't usually throw all your eggs into that basket. Do the same with your first race back from this situation. And start to list things right now that you need, or start to list things at the beginning of your race prep for race day and race weekend. If I know for me, I have a list that exists on my computer. It lives there for if I have to travel to an event or for a race morning specific event. I think it's important for everybody to have that. So use that first race back as um, almost like a prep race or like a reintegration into racing. And remember to get excited. We do this because we like the sport. I think a lot of people maybe get into the sport for different reasons, but we're all still here because we love the sport. Be excited and stoked to race and give a smile across the finish line. So, be cautiously optimistic when race day comes and remember to enjoy the process. Monitoring race protocols. Okay, so if a race is to happen in the current state of affairs, the likelihood is that social distancing and masks are probably going to be a requirement for not necessarily the race, but likely for any type of expo or packet pickup, likely for any type of post race events, likely for anybody who might even be spectating the event. So know what each race organization is looking from you or from your traveling party and follow those protocols so that we can continue racing. I, I think it's important to stress that. Just do what they say. This is what's going to help us keep racing. And knowing what is known about the virus, we just need to follow the protocols that the race organizations have. Fueling and gear, you're likely going to have to be self-sufficient. I talked about in the blog post that I wrote, based on what USA Triathlon and Ironman are providing for us, it sounds as though most races are going to be there might be aid stations, but they're likely self-serve. So be prepared. Think about like a long course bike. You probably don't want to stop in the middle of the bike to grab bottles or gels or chews. So it might be an opportunity to become self-sufficient, carry all the fluids that you need. Maybe save for one stop or two stops. Maybe do a special needs stop instead of stops at every um, aid station. So you have a special needs bag halfway through, and then you refill all your bottles there. But be self-sufficient or be prepared to be. Um, it's a good idea to practice without nutrition, obviously, probably now rather than once race season comes, and to know how much you need, and to bring all of that gear in the event that an expo does not happen. That was also one of the protocols that might have that USA Triathlon and Ironman discussed, was that expos may or may not happen depending on the situation we're in. Obviously, if at some point we move on from COVID-19, things like the expo, post race ceremony, they'll all be back to normal. But in the event that an event happens where social distancing and masks are required, an expo may not happen. So it's important to bring the gear that you need. Um, your sunglasses, goggles, your flat repair kits, little things that you might not remember to bring normally, um, just because the expo would generally have that for you. This seems a little silly to say, but I think it's important that we be patient and kind to the volunteers, to the race organization, to the specific people on site at the event that you're at. These protocols, all of this situation is new territory for everyone involved. So being accepting of those protocols and rules, courteous to the officials, the volunteers, the directors, because of how new it is, it might take us a few races to figure out that we need to do things differently. And if someone's asking you to do something differently, just do it. It'll help us be able to race and continue to race, because the race itself will really be a lot of the same. You look at a lot of the protocols that have been put forth, your swim's going to be maybe a little bit more staggered. You can't draft on the bike anyway. Maybe the race size might be smaller. The run itself, because of the staggered start, hopefully people are more spread out. So the race itself is going to be pretty similar. Obviously, standalone events like a running race can be even more spread apart if it needs to be. So the race itself will be pretty similar, but the before and after just may be a bit different. And it's important to know now that we might have to be a little bit adaptable for that. And now we're into the actual crash course. So really, we spent the most of this talking about things you can do training wise right now without races on the schedule, things you can do mentally, things you can be doing for self-care, and then what races might look like. Now we're going to look into what you could do to get to race day. So, yay, my race is happening in X amount of weeks. time to get ready. So the reason that the base was so important, that first thing that we talked about here, is that now we need to increase our volume and intensity. Likely, if it's a shorter race like a 5K or a sprint or Olympic triathlon, you might already be at that volume, but you might have to increase the intensity. If you've maintained that base training and that foundation, this will be easy. It'll be a piece of cake. If you haven't, that's okay. Or if you're a little behind, that's okay. If you're in doubt, volume over speed. Okay. We always want to make sure we can finish the race comfortably rather than going too hard and having to walk the end of the race. If you're, like it says there, if the race is closer, you want to get the miles done rather than how quickly you are doing them. Okay. Know yourself and your training level. Some people might be able to get ready quicker than others. Talk with your coach. If your volume is already met, you might add the race specificity. If you think you're a little bit behind and you need the volume, that's going to be something that your coach and you can figure out. And then keep the training realistic. If you are behind, don't force in those extra workouts. That's what's going to lead to injury. That's what's going to lead to burnout. That's what's going to lead to you not being at the race. So keep it realistic. If you are behind, just focus on the volume and be happy to be able to get to race day and live to see another day. Select a different race to be that A race. Like I said from the previous slide, simply dial back those expectations. Okay. The whole goal, obviously, is that we're not doing an actual crash course, right? This is a crash course because it's all going to be maybe sudden when races do return. But we want to do this all with proper guidance and smart adjustments. So maintaining that volume now is good, and then properly, increasing volume and intensity will be great once racing does return. It's part one of the crash course. Part two, equipment. We talked a little bit about it before, and it's something that you actually can do now too. But the moment you know that the race is returning, you might not have been taking care of that bike that you're riding, or you might not have been riding the time trial bike. I know myself personally, the time trial bike has been put away for a little bit. I've been on the road bike. So if you haven't been on it, it's a good idea to get on it. Spend some time in the aero position. It is obviously different than your road position, and get it tuned up. Focus on those tires, your drivetrain. If you're listening now and you think that your shifting is a little weird, it's a good opportunity to check on that drivetrain. A lot of shops are still open for service, and getting the chain replaced or the cassettes or the cassette or the chain rings replaced is an important thing to do. And the more often you change that chain, the less often you have to replace the whole drivetrain. So tuning up the bike is always a good choice to do. Okay, so give your bike some love. Run shoes. Right now, this is important too. I think a lot of people may have not been purchasing shoes in the last couple months. It's probably a good opportunity to replace them. But when the race season comes, make sure you're checking the wear. Make sure you're checking your quick laces if you have those for triathlon. Doing some intervals in your race specific shoes, and some longer runs if it's a long course race, to get reacquainted with those shoes is always a good idea. The last thing you want is an injury or calluses because you haven't worn those shoes in a while. So make sure you're getting back into those running race shoes, and make sure your running training shoes are in good shape. And then on the swim, I think some people some people may not adhere to the advice to keep swimming, and because it's often the neglected sport. So once race season comes around, if this is you, check the wetsuit out, your swim skin out, the goggles, make sure they're all sealed, they fit properly, they fit actually, like size wise, as well as tear wise. Get the dust off and hop in the water. But if you keep swimming right now, that'll avoid having to potentially replace a wetsuit come race time. And the last part of the crash course and overview of the whole presentation is the mental prep. This is one of the last slides, so I'll stay on for a few minutes after this slide too. But if you do have questions or comments, please send them at this point too, so we can get to those afterwards. But part three, though, the mental prep. So for all the previous slides, we want to set the expectations early, both with our race result, what we expect us to perform like, and with how the race is going to function, with the expo, with the award ceremony, with transition area, with volunteers, with your nutrition. Get all those things in order at the beginning of your race prep, and then enjoy that you're able to do this again. I think this period of time will remind us all to not take racing and events for granted. I think another big reason beyond physical fitness, beyond the enjoyment of racing, I think one of the other reasons that people race is to cross finish line. So enjoy that process, and then remember to do what you're comfortable with. Check those race protocols. If you feel good about the rules, if you feel good about the news that you're keeping up to date with in the world, if you're comfortable with the return to sport policies, again, you can look at those in the blog. Then go race, and do everything they ask you to do. But just race when you're ready. If those things aren't comfortable for you, or you're not comfortable racing amidst the pandemic, or your area maybe has a higher spike in the virus, just race when you feel is right. Keep training, find your own types of challenges, and you'll race when you're ready. And hopefully we'll all be racing together at some point in the foreseeable future. But start all that prep early. If you want, you can check out the USA Triathlon or Ironman Return to Sport policies. You can find those. You can probably just search on their website. They were published about probably 6 weeks ago. Just be aware of what's to come. Keep your gear in working order all the time, so that having to replace too many things once race season comes back around. And then when in doubt, train. Keep the body moving. One thing we didn't really touch on, come the actual off-season time period, if you're in the Northeast or any place where there's snow sports and you want to supplement some of that, do that. That's something you should do anyway. But do things that make you stay active and keep yourself consistently fit without overdoing it or underdoing it. And then add in challenges when you find appropriate. Okay. And that is your crash course to race prep. Any questions? If you can do me a favor too, while some of you are still here, if you enjoyed this chat or if you found this fun or anything, let us know on social media. Tag Outrival. You can see my social handles right there. We greatly appreciate the support for the folks that attend these, for the folks that race for us or are coached by us too. You can find all the social stuff right there as needed. My socials, as well as the Facebooks for Outrival, and then the local studio if you're curious about what we do in the Northeast. And we'll go for that. Okay, we have a couple questions, actually a couple thank yous. You're welcome. With the extra time, what about maybe raising the A race goal for next year and slowly build towards the higher goal race over time? And thank you, of course. You're welcome. That's actually a very good. So I think what you're asking, Chris, is with the extra time, can we then go faster in the A race? It's absolutely possible. I think it depends on where you are in the sport. So for someone like you specifically, Chris, like this time frame for you is probably beneficial because it allows you more time to build up volume and intensity being newer to the sport. For some folks, if you're more seasoned, I think the repetition of race uh, can be overlooked at times. So having that longer layoff just may mean that first race is getting the cobwebs dusted off. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that, but uh, but yeah, absolutely. So if you're moving that A race out further, you can certainly set yourself some stronger goals, provided that you keep up the intensity, you keep up the base, the foundation. You're keeping yourself healthy. You're resting when you need to. Doing all those things, yeah, absolutely. The A race goal could certainly be executed better. Thinking longer goal. So for longer too, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can build up the volume more, again, similar situation, Chris. If you're building up, so like for anybody in that situation, from like a walk run to then 13.1, um, it's certainly doable. I think one thing to remember for anybody entering the sport or anybody new to sport or anybody just wanting to get back into the swing of racing, I think it's important to experience triathlon for what it is first. So um, if your first, I think someone's first race should always be a shorter course race, only because you get to experience the excitement of it. You get to make mistakes if need be. At the shorter distance, where it's you could do that again. You could do a short course race week after week if you train properly. Um, so I think making a longer, if your goal was a 70.3 and now it's going to be an Ironman, I think it's okay to do, but I would then make sure that you're implementing some shorter races before that. Thoughts on strength training right now? Good question, Don. I believe you should continue to strength train right now. So I think one key component, especially of base phase and adaptation phase, is the strength work, right? Um, it's what helps us prevent injuries. It's what helps us get stronger. It's those marginal. It's something that helps us with marginal gains. Someone who's a seasoned veteran in the sport, looking for that next way to create more power on the bike or to improve run efficiency. Strength training is often the way to do that, and then it's going to help prevent injuries too. Um, that said, obviously with nicer weather and things like that right now, most people are probably steering toward extra volume on training, which is also fine. But I would then just make sure we're incorporating the strength when we can. If you haven't been strength training, something in a 20-minute routine, right? Something simple, some core exercises, uh, some simple leg exercises, simple upper body, um, just as you kind of get back into the swing of the strength training. But definitely important to do. Um, maybe right now folks aren't particularly doing it because uh, race season 2020 is potentially done for them completely. But something to think about when you think about 2021. So if your season's done right now, August 5th, but you want to race on May 1st, well, maybe on October 1st and November 1st, you start to think about, all right, I want to make sure my foundation is solid. So I'm going to work with my coach to create that plan now and really integrate strength training back into the program. I'm just going to click through, make sure. Hopefully I answered that. If I didn't, I'm just going to give another minute or two here. Again, thank you for attending. Thanks for asking some questions here too. Um, I'll say again, if you feel inclined to to just share on social media that you enjoyed it, that it was informative. You can tag me in it, um, any form you want. You can friend me on it. Knock yourself out. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help any questions you might have or any training advice you might look for. Good stuff. Thank you, Chris. I hope so. I hope I wasn't too distracted by my dog. She is a puppy, so we're working with her. But she did a good job, I think. I hope I did a good job too. All right. Once again, I'll say thank you, and I hope you all are staying safe. You have a good rest of your week, and we hope to see you on the race scene soon. Stay healthy and have a good one.